Hello, welcome to SocTalk with JNAB and the Sundance Kid. We are going to explore the frontiers of technology, art, and the human experience. Hello, welcome to SocTalk. This week we are going to be talking about the history of movie magic and special effects vs visual effects, practical and computing. And today we brought along a guest, Will. Will has come up from down south, and why don't you introduce yourself to our audience?
So my name's Will Harvey. I'm a special effects makeup artist from Hertfordshire, just north of London. And I collaborated with both Jamie and Nikki on a project a few months ago when we did a short film called Roast in Peace.
We sure did. Yeah, so, okay, where to start? All right, the beginning. We kind of did this, actually, I don't want to go into too much. I mean, well, depends how many people listened to our last episode when we talked with Nikki specifically on history of technology in film. And the history of technology in film, movie magic has been around since the beginning, because cinema in the beginning was special effects. It was something that people had never seen before. So going to a big room where you see a big train coming towards you was terrifying, and nobody had a concept of what that was. So back then, I mean, everything was special effects. One of the very first practical in-camera effects I know of is a beheading of Queen, where they just did a jump cut stop frame. So, go like this with a hammer, swing down, stop recording, change it for a dummy, start recording again. Very, very easy. But nowadays, we have all sorts of technologies, and specifically, where to start? Okay, maybe let's start with...
Can I suggest something?
Please.
Okay, the last time we talked about movie magic, you made special mention of Georges Méliès.
Yes.
Who is a hero of yours and of mine. Méliès was a stage magician who took advantage of this new technology of cameras, and more specifically of moving cameras, or cameras for moving images, and started doing stage magic special effects. So he did a lot of stuff like double exposure, triple, quadruple exposure, shooting the same thing over and over again with black background so he could reinsert himself as a character and appear multiple times in a single film. The Journey to the Moon, where the moon's face gets hit in the eye with a rocket. I mean, he did a lot of cool stuff like that. The man with the rubber head, where the head swells up. So much stuff like that was based on the illusion. And you mentioned before that big reason that could work was because of the static nature of cameras in those days. Yeah. Right, those cameras were really static, and so it made it possible for him to put the audience where he would want someone to sit so that his trick would fool them. That kind of tomfoolery, I think, was the beginning of the whole thing, that sort of playing a trick on people. And I like the fact that the word we use for cinema in the English language is based on the fact that it's just really cool that they move.
Yeah. Okay, so that's an interesting point there about the camera being fixed and always knowing where people are going to be looking. Well, when you're doing effects and practical effects, say you're making a head, and I know in this example how you did it, but do you ever consider priority for specific areas?
In terms of where the camera's facing?
Yeah. Or do you just try and make them as generic and useful as possible? I
mean, a lot of the time, directors will ask the special effects artists' thoughts on where they should shoot.
Yeah.
It's not always something you get input of, though. A lot of it depends who you're working with. Like, if you're working with somebody like Ridley Scott, Ridley has 14 cameras shooting at any one time. So he gets every angle.
Yeah.
But if you've got one camera... sometimes it's good to get different shots just to see how it looks before you start shooting. So get a slightly different angle, different lighting. But it's all to do with the lighting as well, isn't it? I mean, it's not always just the camera. It can be to do with the lighting, the exposure settings, and so on. So, yeah, I think it's important to get input from everybody involved with that effect, especially if it's a special effects artist who's designed something. They might have a certain way that they think it would look better being shot. So it's always helpful.
Yeah, and maybe we should say what sort of special effects you specialize in.
Well, I do a bit of everything. That's the thing. So it can vary from anything from severed heads, prosthetics, moving rigs. So we had the great one of Imogen from Roast in Peace. A lot of armor, props, helmets, you name it, I can pretty much make it. So it's a bit of everything, really.
Yeah, you've got a shop where you.
Yeah. So Monster Effects is one of the UK's biggest prosthetics suppliers. So I supply mainly to low budget films and people at home. The ethos behind the business was always offering film quality product at a reasonable price, because back when I started it in 2014, you just couldn't buy prosthetics at a reasonable price. So I started off with a range of 6 different prosthetics, and it's now grown to over 120 different prosthetics.
Wow. So, well, could you explain what a prosthetic is for the audience?
Yeah, so a prosthetic is an appliance that you put on yourself to transform the shape of your face, arms, hands, pretty much anything. So I do a lot of zombie makeup, so prosthetics to make your cheekbones look sunken, forehead, all the exposed bones, wounds, things like that. So it's giving the illusion of something real using something fake.
Yeah, I've seen some of the things that you can do, which is very cool. And this is maybe interesting to go into as well. How much? So you're many things. You're at once almost like a chemist, a manufacturer, an engineer, but also an artist. And what I was impressed with one of the rigs you did for us was how much detail you put into the skin. Like you could just talk about skin and like because people just think when you're a kid, you're growing up, you're like you color in peach and you're done. Right, yeah. Or something, or whatever skin tone someone is. But there's a lot more going on.
Yeah, so what we call colour matching and colour theory is actually very difficult, and it's a very refined skill. So when you look at the skin on your hand, for example, you're not just looking at a peach colour, like you're saying. There is an undertone of which will be a light peach colour, but then you've got reds, blues, greens, pinks, purples, all the different colours in the spectrum. So trying to get that colour matching in place is quite tricky. So with the head that we did for Alec, I enlisted a friend of mine called Ashley Powell to paint it for me, and he painted it to match it to Alec's skin tone, including the subtle veining in his nose and on his cheeks and stuff. So it's really a refined art getting colour matching correct.
Yeah, it's something that I've only lightly delved into, not practically, but I've tried sculpting digitally quite a few times, and a lot of the tools will let you digitally sculpt, but then also texture paint on top.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's a case of starting with red because your blood vessels are the most underlying, and then layering them up with layers of skin and adding imperfections all over the place. That's something lots of people, some people take a while to realize is how much the real world is all about imperfections that make
that's
something.
The thing when you're digitally sculpting, isn't it? Because you're using a lot of symmetry to sculpt. It can be too perfect at times, and then a lot of digital artists will actually go in and create imperfections on one side so that the two sides are asymmetrical.
Yeah.
But it's quite a skill to get it looking realistic. Certainly not something I've managed to master.
I would disagree. I think, maybe digitally sculpting, but that brings me to another part, technology-wise, interestingly. So this is something that's changed over time that I saw you do. Maybe walk us through what the original way to get a mold was, and then kind of what you do now.
So the process of live casting, you mean?
Yeah.
So in essence, what you would have to do would be to get your actor, and if they have hair, you'd have to put a bald cap on them, and then cover.
Sorry, just to preface this, what we're talking about is if we needed to make, let's say, a severed head of someone.
Yeah.
A model of it.
So
not of someone, but of a specific someone.
Yeah, a specific someone.
So a like-for-like head of an actor, for example. So you would put a bald cap on them, and then you'd have to cover their head in either alginate or silicone, and make quite a thick layer of product over their face, let that go off, and then give them a plaster jacket round 2 halves. So it's quite a claustrophobic thing for a lot of people. A lot of people aren't comfortable doing it. So one of the beautiful things about technology is that we've had recent advancements with 3D scanning. And you can buy a 3D scanner off the shelf for about £2,000 now that will give you a perfect scan, which, like the one we used for scanning all of the actors for Roast in Peace, it was just incredible, the level of quality of the stuff that we got out. And then you can take that scan away, edit it in software, and then 3D print it. Whereas before you would have to pour a plaster head, sand out any imperfections in it, fill any holes, and then you'd potentially have to mold it again to make your master copy. So we don't have to do that with 3D scanning. We can make the master copy in the software and then just print it.
A much, like you say, much easier process for the actor, not having to be underneath all that.
I mean, obviously it has its own challenges because we still have issues with 3D printers where, as you saw, we got a phantom head where there was no head printed, but it printed all the supports. So it's not a refined art yet, but it's getting there. And with the recent advances in 3D printing, I mean, printers are so cheap now. You can buy one off the shelf for next to nothing versus what they were 5 years ago when you had to pay thousands for them.
For decent ones at least.
Yeah.
The thing I was super impressed with the scanner that you had, it wasn't just the geometry. It also got the texture as well.
Yeah.
Which is pretty darn useful.
Yeah, because then it overlays the texture layer over the top of the mesh that it's captured. So it is a brilliant bit of technology. And I'm still having a lot of fun getting to grips with it. I actually discovered an interesting technique with it where if you spray a beard or any kind of facial hair with dry shampoo, it mattifies the hair down so you can capture it.
Yeah, because I remember that we had that trouble with the scan last time with the hair.
Yeah.
The beard specifically, Steve's beard.
Yeah, it goes see-through,
Yeah,
so.
We didn't need the head in the end, but the bottom half of the face where his beard was, with the geometry was just lost.
Yeah. So dry shampoo actually works beautifully for doing that. So I'm going to be using that a lot more.
Top
so
tips.
if you or John ever want to get your head scanned, we can do it.
Yes, please.
Actually, we're talking recently potentially about doing some sort of research with scanning heads. Useful, just for documentation and things like that. Yeah, well, we'll look into that later.
I love the idea. I used to have a scan of my head from the early 90s.
Yeah.
And if I still had that, I'd put the two next to each other as a warning for everyone who's thinking about getting old.
Beware.
I thought about doing something similar for my nephew, though, and my niece and my nephews, but scanning them periodically over time and then having all the scans as they grow up. I thought that'd be quite a cool thing to do. But
it's a lovely idea.
Yeah.
It would be super interesting because even just having SD card full. Cool. Right. That's good to know. That's still recording fine. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. Ignore that. So again, this is a relatively new tech. This is our second time using this podcast setup. So still got some kinks.
Right. It's a great bit of kit though. I mean,
it's all right. It's about mid-market, which is pretty good.
That's a reach for us. Mid-market.
Mid-market. Yeah.
Reaching upwards.
Yeah. Reaching upwards.
Get to mid-market.
Yeah. Previously, we're just using wireless lapels.
Which has got one.
Yeah, they comfortable, but audio is not good. We would be clipping them onto us and they'd be flopping down.
Were they the GoPro ones?
No, they were Rode wireless Goes.
Okay, I've got the GoPro magnetic one, which is quite good, but I haven't really used it.
Yeah. They're useful for that, but not great for podcasts. This is technically better because we can hear and modulate our own voices in real time. Okay, so all right, where are we? Practical vs digital. Okay, I'll put this out to you both. Why do some recent films just not feel right with effects? So let's say there was a lot of people going on about the most recent Flash film, for example, and how uncanny valley to the max and just felt cheap and rushed. I mean, that's one of the answers, is rushed. But I
do think rushed is one of the answers.
Yeah.
I agree. If a team budgets out a schedule they need to follow, and then you cut the time that they have, then you're forcing them to do fewer iterations. And yeah, it's always going to hurt. But I think there's another thing that's going on where a lot of folks involved, excuse me, a lot of folks who are using computers now, AI assisted and otherwise, seem to forget that the design process is an intellectual and artistic process that doesn't have anything to do with the technology you choose to use. So, I mean, at some level you have to design for the tools you have, but conceptually, you have to conceptualize of these things in a way that makes sense to the story and to the audience. So you gave the example of the Flash film. Lots of interesting things in that film, lots of bad things in that film, some really nice things in that film. It was a mix, and given how many different producers took over and changed things, I'm not surprised. But to me, one of the core conceits of the Flash is that he is the fastest man alive. Why would you have him run in slow motion to seem as though he's running fast? So just the very concept of how they were going to do the illusion of him running struck me as ridiculous. The very first time he starts to speed up and you get the visual effect of the world warping around him, well, he gets interrupted by some schoolgirls, but that's another whole bizarre thing that we could go into. As soon as he starts actually running, it's just hilarious. It's like a little kid pretending to be fast by going in slow motion.
Yeah.
It was the same in the Justice League film, though, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Really? It was,
It's just a bad design of an effect.
I see the logic. Okay, we're seeing things from his perspective. If he could go really fast, maybe his synapses fire up faster or whatever, and everything slows down from his perspective.
But then everything else should be slow, not him. You could keep him moving at normal speed and slow down everything else around him. And that's been done with speedster effects, and it looks great.
Yeah, one of the X-Men films.
Yeah.
With Quicksilver.
With Quicksilver.
Everyone goes on about that scene being great.
That was one of the best speedster scenes I've ever seen.
Yeah, because they mixed it between perspectives. So yes, he was doing fast things, and when he wanted to, it would slow down, and he would be running around playing with things in slow motion. Which
is exactly the kind of thing that you would like to think you'd be clever enough to do if you had super speed.
I think the lightning every time he runs as well, though, it just doesn't look right. I mean, you're talking back to Quicksilver and how great that thing was, because he did have the capability to touch things that were suspended in air and stuff. But when you look at the Flash and all this lightning they put around him and stuff, that's not how I remember the Flash comics being at all.
Yeah, at all.
I don't know my lore too much, but I believe there's some lore thing that makes him some Flash silly energy that makes him being able to. At some point more recently.
That was introduced, I think, in the 90s.
The
oldest comic I used to own back when I owned old comics was All Flash Quarterly from 1941. You could say I'm a fan of the character. He was just fast. He got his power being hit by lightning, so lightning was the symbol.
Right.
But he didn't have lightning powers until quite recently. And even then, if you think about it, if he's moving super fast and running around the planet, generating lightning energy as he goes, isn't that a scorched earth sort of scenario? Yeah,
that was what I was going to say. But it's the same concession you have to do with any superhero, really. The amount of energies that you're playing with, if they were running that fast, the air would just superheat around them and burn everyone around them.
Right. So there have been attempts for decades to try to explain that kind of thing with just enough pseudoscience to make it plausible. And admittedly, pseudoscientific explanations that say that he generates a dampening field. Who cares? The point is he can pick someone up and run with them and they don't die and he doesn't die and they don't destroy the land around them. If you go in that direction, if you lean in that direction, maybe it doesn't look as flashy. Maybe you have to come up with some kind of a water bubble effect or something like that if you even want to address it. Having lightning all around is cool. Its visual effects are cool. But it ruins the story because it suggests there is something going on.
Yeah.
Right? Like, what would it do to all the people around you to suddenly have lightning shooting out everywhere?
But even the sort of shockwave generated from him running, you think it would throw people off their feet, wouldn't it? And they don't show anything like that.
That's the dampening field.
Yeah, exactly. Without the dampening field, you say you had the slow motion and we're in slow motion, I just went like this to go move my hand and push you to, it would just go through you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Blood and guts would go everywhere.
Absolutely. Which
a bit like The Boys.
The Boys, yeah.
Yeah, which was a great examination of that very issue.
Yeah.
Right? What happens when you run in a crowded street?
Yeah, he runs through someone and explodes the person.
Yeah, and I thought it was funny that Justice League and the earlier movies in that Snyderverse all wanted to make the powers more spectacular. So you see Superman put his hand on the ground before he starts to fly, and the ground crumbles a bit under his hand.
Yeah.
So you are telling us visually, before he takes flight, that he causes damage to the planet around him. He can't do that. One of the coolest conceits about Superman is that he's this ultra-dense being. I love the fact that he could walk through the ground as easily as walk along the top of it. That he could walk through a building as easily as through the door. And he's just supposed to be constantly in control, right? That's part of how he's using his superpowers all the time, is not killing all of us just by being amidst us.
Yeah.
That's a really cool thing. But if exercising his powers causes damage, then automatically you have to say, okay, well, then there's going to be a sonic boom when he takes off, and the air displacement will knock all of the planes out of the sky.
Yeah.
You know, like, you're introducing problems you don't need to have by having one cool-looking shot. Ooh, let's have the ground crumble under his fist. Ooh, let's have lightning roar.
Potentially, but then maybe a lot of audiences are just like, cool, and then it's only us that goes.
I don't think so. I think it comes back to, is it Hiroshi Ishii who said the Uncanny Valley originally? I think it was, right?
Pass.
Rings a bell. I think so.
Yeah, I think so. Anyway, so the idea of the Uncanny Valley is that something is really, really close to normal, to meeting your mental model of what the world should be, and it's just not quite there. And the closer you are to normal, the more horrifying not quite there looks. That's why if you watch The Simpsons, it looks, you stop thinking of it as a cartoon and start thinking of them as characters. You're just watching the story, right? You don't talk about the writers who write Homer, you talk about Homer.
Yeah.
Right? And even though the animation is extremely simplistic, it's completely consistent.
Yeah.
They don't violate it, right? Anytime you violate the consistency, you're screwing up. Consistency doesn't have to be at any particular level. It just has to be maintained.
Yeah. So, okay, this is what we always do. We go on tangents upon tangents.
Sorry, but going back to your original question.
Yes.
I think the biggest issue with film nowadays as well is that because there is so much CGI introduced into pretty much everything, the reactions of the actors aren't necessarily there.
Yeah.
So if you look back at Michael Bay's Transformers films, when Shia LaBeouf was interacting with the Transformers, there was always a slight delay with the conversation or the reaction that he was having to this being that he was supposed to have in front of him that he couldn't actually see. Wasn't necessarily that real. And that's why I love practical effects, because if you've got a physical creature in front of you, you're getting a real reaction from your actors. But you just don't have that much anymore. And it's unfortunate that we've kind of gone down this route, but it seems like practical effects are sort of starting to come back a bit more now.
Yeah, for sure. And this always goes to, which I still maintain, and I'll fight people on this, the most believable film is still Jurassic Park, the original. And one, there's a few reasons, but one of the main reasons is that this was the start of CGI in films, as in, quite significantly. There being a few things here and there, but this was one where it was make or break. It was ILM, the guys, geniuses at ILM, that were just like, no, we think we can do it now. Because originally they were going to be using stop motion. I forget the artist specifically, but one of the great stop motion art, was going to be doing it.
I think. Oh no, sorry, not Baker. No. Older than Baker. The fellow who did Sinbad.
Yeah.
Oh, that's horrible.
Was it?
Yeah, it was. It was the fellow who did Sinbad. Ray Harryhausen.
Okay, we'll make sure that we put a footnote if we have it wrong. But so you can still see some of the tests with the stop motion, and it looks really cool. The technology of stop motion had gotten. This was at its peak just before it got cut off. So seeing it is really, really cool because they figured out motion blur with it as well. So it got in really, really good. And you can see even the scenes with the T-Rex biting off the tire, the velociraptors in the kitchen. And it looks really good. And that was also previs. It wasn't quite there to what it would have been finally, but it looks amazing. But then it was the guys at ILM showed Spielberg a test, and he was like, all right, okay, now I see this can work. And then the line from the stop motion artist said, I think I'm extinct, which they stuck in the movie as well. But my point being is that the CGI guys were basically, they were like, this is our proving point. This is our point where we have to make sure that this works as best as possible. And the amount of time, energy, research that they put into every single millisecond that those dinosaurs are 3D animated on the screen is intense. A lot of thought, a lot of trying to get everything as perfect as possible. Whereas now, there's a lot of tools, makes it easier. You can
but you're talking
skip
about
a few things.
The Jurassic Park era is the golden age of special effects.
Yeah.
Because it's the perfect hybrid of physical.
That's where I was going to get to as well. Yeah.
Virtual. But I feel like we've almost taken a step backwards now. Because you look at the more recent films and you can just see they're fake. There's not really much of it. It doesn't have as much of an impact. And, you know, films like Star Wars, Jurassic Park and so on, you can go back and watch those countless times and still fall in love with the story every single time. But if I try and watch one of the new Jurassic World films, I think I've only seen them once. Because I have no desire to actually go back and watch them again.
100%. Yeah. It stuck the point to me how easy and silly it had gotten to just stick dinosaurs in. When there's a scene with Chris Pratt just randomly talking to someone and there's holographic dinosaurs in the background. Just because, you know, it's a future tech city, so there's holograms of dinosaurs and they're in the back, just being there for the sake of being there. And then that defies the whole original point of Jurassic Park, was it was also a monster movie. And you don't always show the monster. That's one of the golden rules. If you're just showing them all over the place, they lose their magic. They're not as special. They're just wild animals as opposed to monsters.
Well, and in all the recent Jurassic World films, they've created a new monster.
Yeah, and
so
they've
they
tried
had like the Indominus Rex, then they had the Indoraptor, and then so it'll be interesting to see what the new Jurassic World film has, because it's still very much under wraps what exactly is going on there. But hopefully they'll do the original film justice rather than just continuing on with this story of, you know, just for the sake of it.
Yeah. So many points to make here, and I've lost track of the other point I was going to make.
I'm going to jump in while you find your track. I think this comes back to the same thing I was talking about before. If you haven't conceived of the story really well, if you haven't conceived of the arc that your characters are going through really well, then it's easier to just throw crap at the screen. Yeah. Right? We can do this and we can do that. And you end up putting holographic dinosaurs behind characters that serve no point at all. Right? And maybe just take away from the points that the characters are trying to make with their actual acting. On the other side of it, there are filmmakers who I think are doing the 3D effects really well. So if you look at James Gunn's Guardian of the Galaxy movies, his brother plays Rocket Raccoon. And his brother walks around in a harness 3 feet tall on the set. So he's all hunched down and walking on his hands and feet in a weird crouch so that they have someone to look at right where Rocket is. Yeah. So that they're interacting with his speech in real time and they can go back and forth and do that improv that's so good in James Gunn movies where you can't always tell what the difference is between what was scripted and what wasn't. So I think that's the answer to the issue you mentioned where Shia LaBeouf is interacting with something he can't really imagine, and you end up with this broken interaction.
Yeah, I think it comes to... This is where I agree with the feeling of the premise, that it's gotten worse, but there has always been examples of people who are taking the time and doing it right. Yeah. Andy Serkis, pretty much anything Andy Serkis is in, they're doing it right, because he's on set.
And they're normally doing it with motion capture.
Yeah, and they're doing it with motion capture, and they're making sure they're actually getting his performance. Yeah. Real world interactions and performance, which makes it feel much more believable. Now, the story of some of those Planet of the Apes films, I'm not too sure. I kind of tapped out a while ago.
Yeah, I've not seen the new one yet.
I couldn't even tell you how many there've been. I guess they were just going for the actual old school thing that there had been. How many Planet of the Apes films had there been before the new reboot? There was a lot.
Too many.
Yeah.
If you count the television movies, way too many.
So then I guess that felt enabled them to start doing that again. Okay, but no, I was going to go back to another reason why Jurassic Park in that golden era feels a lot better. And one of the main reasons I would posit, and you can see this direct change between if you get a Blu-ray of Star Wars Episode 1 and you get a Blu-ray of Star Wars Episode 2, Attack of the Clones, V's Phantom Menace. Phantom Menace looks fantastic. Attack of the Clones looks horrible. Yeah. On a bigger screen. Reason for that, it was just before they switched to shooting digitally. And one of the reasons that all this like late 90s, early 2000s VFX looks great was because they would print it out and reproject it back onto film. And that gives this feeling, this matchiness, the imperfections that just ties the CGI with the real world content is really, really well. And it's something compositors try for ages to try and match, and adding fake grain, taking grain plate, like we just shot a film and there's some VFX, but at one point I had to tell the camera team to stick a lens cap on and just record high ISO and give me a grain plate of the camera so that I can overlay it and match it. But it will never give you the reprojection because it just adds all these subtleties of blending everything together. And that's another reason. But like I say, if you go again, just get a Blu-ray, watch The Phantom Menace, please, Attack of the Clones, because that Attack of the Clones, I think, was one of the very first feature-length films shot fully on digital. And it was early digital, so it wasn't as good as it is now. And you can just see how not nice it looks.
Yeah, that whole... Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say that imperfection is what's missing in modern-day film. A lot of modern-day films, not all, but a lot of modern-day films are missing that imperfection. And that's what the big issue is that they're trying to make things too perfect.
Yeah. I guess also cinema goes through waves of this. For striving for perfection vs imperfection, like having clean vs dirty. So one of the best times in cinema were people making one of the best, the very best lenses that you possibly could, where they thought depth of field was an error rather than a creative tool. If you watch Citizen Kane, those glasses that they made for that are perfect. There is no depth of field. Everything in the front you can see just as clear as everything in the back. The famous introductory scene with him, the child playing in the back with the snow, and then it pans all the way to the front, and you can see everyone perfectly in the foreground and everyone perfectly in the background, because they thought that's what we have to strive to achieve, is to have these perfect lenses that will capture everything. Then, I don't know, say like when Spielberg and that were coming around, people were getting more used to these perfect clean lenses and that being cinema, but people were still using cheap lenses in documentary filmmaking. So running around, because they couldn't afford the big, crazy, expensive lenses, so they would use dirty little lenses, and then you would have this focus and imperfection. But because people had started attaching that to their minds as documentary and that being reality, then when you have Spielberg coming along and using that tool, then it felt more real to people, because this looks like documentary, so it's like real.
Or
if I'm making sense.
Or Spielberg, slightly before, like Scorsese.
Yeah, Scorsese.
Or you could go across the channel and talk about Godard and the Nouvelle Vague of cinema in France, where all of a sudden they wanted you to be seeing things from the perspective of people on the street while these things are happening.
Yeah.
So if you watch, what's it called, Coup au Feu, Coup au Vent, Breathless, a lot of the scenes are doing exactly that. You're looking through a dirty lens. You're looking through a shaky lens. You're seeing something, and just the way it's being shown to you has emotional value to the story. It's wonderful storytelling.
Yeah, and it's playing around with the audience's preconceptions before going in, because that changes over time. So, for example, The Office, when The Office TV series, the original one, came along, that type of TV show had existed around that time, but real ones, like there was one about airports, I can't remember the name of in the UK, but it was where they went to airports and they just filmed the everyday lives of people working in these places. And then when The Office came along, they shot it exactly like that. So because people had understood this kind of reality version of it, but then when they're making a fictional version of it, but using all the same filmmaking styles, it felt even more real. So then when the awkward cringe came along, it added another weight to it.
Right. Yeah, it's an interesting thing that the capturing a style that exists in the audience's mind already.
Yeah.
So that you're taking them half of the way into the story just by doing that in a way that they won't consciously recognize. Akira Kurosawa did that, right, with his films from the 50s, from the 50s right up to the 90s. He'd have these dramatic films, and you'd see a battle or something having trouble remembering the names of his films. But for example, in The Seven Samurai, you go back and forth between seeing gritty, dirty shots, including a couple, I think, that used pull focus, people talking to each other and looking out across, and then you follow their focus and focus on what they're looking at. But then more stylized combat, where it's almost like watching no theater, right?
Yeah.
Or kabuki theater. Everybody is in rigid poses. There's a lot of strong lighting in the background with silhouettes as characters, and it's all just different storytelling styles, and it immediately lifts you into a certain mood.
Yeah.
It's something that I think a lot of modern films get wrong because they aren't trying to do that, or if they're trying to do it, they're trying to do it with a video game sensibility. Let's make this like a video game.
Yeah.
And most video game movies you watch don't feel like a video game at all. Maybe a rare exception is Free Guy.
Yeah.
Right, which really feels like a video game by not trying to replicate any particular video game's visual style.
Yeah.
But the ingredients and the interactions instead, I think. Of course, I could be wrong. It wouldn't be the first time today.
Oh boy, where do we go with practical V's? So we made a film recently, Will.
We did.
That's one of the reasons we found you, because me and Nikki were adamant that we were doing practical effects in this one. My last film before that, I had done VFX and spent 2 years of my life sitting down trying to make visual effects for the film. And we very quickly decided there's absolutely no way we're doing CGI or visual effects for this one. So then we searched around and we found Will, and then immediately click, and we're like, okay, boom, perfect, let's go. But maybe, let's talk about some of the things you made, because they're really cool. So we talked about Alec getting his head scanned.
Yeah.
But then we had another crazy request. Should I set it up of what our request was? So our request was, we want to have one of our characters' head snap back and then an arm to come out of her throat, or something to grow out of her throat. So when you hear a request like that, what's your process?
I love it.
Yeah.
I love it. It's like, great, we can do that. So it involved a lot of R&D around an effect, actually, which has been done in CGI a lot. So if you think about things like Constantine, where the son of the devil is trying to come out of her neck and he's pushing through and his face is coming through, and it led me to go down a bit of a rabbit hole with it and try and find whether anybody had really done that practically. Not a lot of people have, or if they have, they've overlaid over the top of it. So then it led to the thing that I love the most, which is doing some tests with different layers of silicon to try and determine what would work most effectively to have a hand not only coming through the silicon, but coming through and it being visibly a hand and not just something stretching the silicon from underneath. So how I actually did that was I had to make I think it was 4 or 5 layers of silicon, but different softnesses of silicon. So the center of the actual mold, or the center of the cast, was completely liquid, or fluid, if you will. So it had firmer layers on the outside so that it had a membrane which encapsulated the really soft silicon in the center, so you could push through it and actually get that stretch and actually visibly see a hand coming through. But the other challenge, of course, was with the head snapping back, the neck had to be rigid enough that it wasn't going to stretch and tear as soon as the head snapped backwards. So the way to combat that was to put a mesh around the area where the hand could come through, so that it strengthened the size to stop it from tearing.
What was the mesh made of?
It's just almost a see-through mesh called tulle, Tuille. So it's a fabric that we inlay into silicon all the time when we're doing any kind of masks that have to be stretched over the face or anything like that. It just gives it extra strength, basically.
Okay, it's the actual fabric tool that you could buy and make clothing out of.
Yeah.
Wow, isn't that something?
And there was, I remember when we were doing it, because I've been playing around with some previs on just different variations of how things could look. And I had figured out just by doing it virtually, when things are coming up, like the idea of a hand poking through skin like that. The problem is that when you see it, yes, you'll see the surface on the skin, you'll see the shape of it,
Right.
but you won't see the silhouette of the hand. And then I played around by putting lights underneath and everything. And then remember on the day when we started doing it, it was like, yes, it was poking out and kind of working. And I was just there and then, like, someone grab a light. We put it underneath. And then, yeah, all of a sudden, boom, you start just shining this light at certain points and you could really see the silhouette of the hand and it looked great.
There's a great BTS shot of myself, Jamie, and Joss, the creature actor, all laying underneath this rig in a line. we're all looking at the screen trying to make sure that I'm shaking it to make sure it looks like she's shaking, and Jamie's making sure the light's in the right place, and then Joss is moving his hand around.
Isn't that lovely?
Really good picture.
And you know what I noticed? Because we did this and we shot all that. Then a couple months later, I saw a trailer for Alien Romulus, and I noticed they'd start doing that. It's the only one I've seen of all the Alien films, but when it's inside the chest, they have it kind of glowing, so you can see the silhouette of the alien creature inside about to burst out.
Makes sense. It's an improvement on the shot.
Well,
Yeah.
the other thing about Alien Romulus is that all of the face huggers are practical.
Yeah.
So Weta Workshop actually designed all these radio-controlled face huggers and puppeted face huggers that were running around on set. And a couple of my colleagues who I worked with out there have got these really cool videos of them puppeteering these face huggers, and it just looks incredible. And I think that is a classic example of them kind of going back to the practical aspect of it, because you get the fear on people's faces when this thing's running across the floor, you know.
And it also just it gives you a feeling. Like I remember seeing horror films when I was a kid, just glancing here and there and seeing things I'm not supposed to. And it would always just be this absolute terrifying, horrific space, like this tangible space where these things are actually existing and seeing it and feeling it. That's because everything I was seeing was like The Thing. And, you know, having this real practical, there is something there that exists in reality and it's horrible and it's there. That, yeah, you just lose when it's bad CGI. You know, some of the later Alien films, just like, say, I don't know, Alien versus Predator or whatever, when there's just CGI running around all over the place. Yeah, sure, you can make them look much more acrobatic and they can do all these things, but you don't need that. Just
And if you do, why not intercut?
yeah.
Right? I mean, it's a movie. You're not performing on stage. If you need to have 75 different actors and models and other technology to portray the monster, then use 75.
Yeah.
And you don't need to get young Jean-Claude Van Damme overheating in a rubber suit.
Yeah.
It's kind of one of those things, though, isn't it, where if you have to talk an actor through the process of what's happening in front of them, so you're going, okay, so this actor is going to have something burst out of their chest and you need to react as if it's the most horrific thing you've ever seen, versus the first Alien film where they kind of told them it was going to happen, but then they made it much more graphic. Mm-hmm. So the looks of horror were real almost. You know, the people were disgusted by it, and this thing bursting out of the guy's chest really had an impact on the audience as well as the actors that were there, because
Absolutely.
The thing you miss with CGI is the real reactions.
Yeah.
And I think that's why we get this perception that things aren't as good now, because you're not getting real reactions.
Well, that's why we specifically in our last film, Rust in Peace, we had our actors having their eyes awkwardly closed for about half an hour while we had Joss all in Will's prosthetics coming out. Just like, keep your eyes closed, just awkwardly like gooing him up and everything, getting him all ready.
And Joss couldn't see anything because he had these beautiful contact lenses, which a colleague of mine made from a company called Cantor and Nissel, to make him look completely blind. But they did actually make him blind. So we had to guide him around the set to make sure that he was in the right position. And then, was it you or Joss who came up with the idea of having the duct tape that he could run his foot along so that he knew he was walking in a straight line.
Nice.
So as long as his foot was on that tape, he knew he was going in the right direction. And it just worked brilliantly.
That's like a Méliès style, the audience won't see it, but we will use it sort of idea. I love that.
Yeah, and it's great. We've been saying editing parts of it so far, and it's just all of Will's work and Joss's performance. It's a bit we're going to be iterating like 100 times because we want to make sure that it's, one, showing how good your work is, but two, making sure that we're getting the very best out of it for that story beat.
But we should probably mention that you did put VFX into it as well, because the cut scene between when we had the practical head of Imogen and then Joss in his full form was actually digitally designed by yourself.
Yeah, I mean, the previs was, so I did a bit of concept artwork here and there.
But then you actually did the projector on the
wall
wall as well,
part. Yeah, sorry, I forgot about that. No, because because this whole transformation we're having, this is spoilers for our film, but it doesn't matter. There is a crowd there. Everyone
see the film anyway.
Yeah,
watch it anyway.
Yeah, the when Imogen's head snaps, Imogen's the actress, head snaps back and the hand comes out. That would have been, it would have been impossible. Will could definitely have done it, figured out how to do the whole thing, but we only had a certain budget and we only had a certain amount of time. So we had to focus on, just make this part, like focus on that part, get that really, really good, get the head snap and the hand coming out.
We originally talked about getting a full silicon body that Joss could stand inside and then have it come off of him, and it was just... it's going to be complicated. There
was a project creep, or what's the name of it? Feature creep. That's in the tech terms, but
project creep, sure.
Project creep. So instead, what we did is I did it in CGI, where I had a 3D model of the actress, roughly the same as the actress, falling over and then having it fully come out. So the hand coming out and then the skin falling off. But obviously I hate that. That wouldn't look very good for all the reasons that we've just discussed. Right. So our workaround was, well, hold on. Let's go old school horror of shadows on the wall. So I rendered it out so that would be a shadow, and then we used a real projector, projected it on a big back wall so that we see them in the foreground reacting to it, the standard kind of that trope shot of the creature coming in on the shadow, and projected down the back wall. And it turned out pretty
like a tribute
cool.
to Nosferatu.
Exactly that. Yeah.
Isn't that wonderful? I'm really looking forward to seeing the film. Before we go any further, though, you mentioned the name of your friend's company that made the contact lenses.
Yeah.
Would you please say that name again more clearly and slowly?
Cantor and Nissel.
I'm sure they appreciate that. So do I.
So they do all of the contact lenses for all of the big feature films. So Guardians of the Galaxy, pretty much anything that warrants the need for hand-painted contact lenses for big actors, they're the ones that are the go-to in our industry.
Well, in that case, they probably don't care that you said their name on our podcast.
They'll appreciate it, I'm sure.
Yeah, they were fantastic. And then I remember we were about to struggle figuring out, because we had a sword that Joss had needed to interact with, but it was a real sword. It was kind of sharp. So we're about to try and figure out ways of doing this, and we're like, hold on, wait, the camera's on this side. Just take one of the lenses out. This is the easy workaround. You can only see this lens, so let's not put that one.
Nice.
Simple things sometimes.
Yeah, Méliès again, right?
Yeah. It took us longer than it should have to figure that out.
But that to me, that's one of the joys of working on any complex project that's for a different audience than the people working on it, right? You get to find those solutions. And if you do it right, it's seamless for everybody else. They'll never know what you did.
Yeah, there's
problem solving. That's the key. My job is problem solving. People come to me with a challenge, and I have to give them solutions. And that's what I love about it, is the problem solving aspect and coming up with something that sort of ticks all the boxes.
Wonderful.
Yeah, then the problem solving never stops, and half of the problem solving is on set with 5 minutes to go. You have to figure out how we're going to work around this problem.
Now, what do you think would happen if you suddenly had 1,000 times the budget? If you were looking at not having to say, we need to solve this in the next 5 minutes. Do you think you'd want to still go on solving things live on set? Or would you like to be able to say, you know what, wrap for the day, everybody. Catch the helicopter to the Caribbean, and I'll call you back when we're ready to shoot again.
I think it's a case of more money, more problems. If you're going to have that much money, it's always the case. It doesn't matter how much your budget is. You're putting every penny of it to get your production value out of it. So,
and more budget equals more people, which equals more problems.
Yes, it wouldn't be a case of we're doing, because that would be moving. You just said, let's take a flight back to that's a massive part of the budget that you're now not putting into the film. So yeah, it would be a case of every penny, it would just be the same, but larger scale, ultimately, I would think.
Okay. Well, what I was thinking was that it'd be really cool if somebody like Scorsese made a film now in his old age that he shot the same way he shot Taxi Driver. And if they were to give him 100 million more or 500 million more than the original budget, that could go to charity. There's a whole lot of towns up in Canada that need clean water. About $5,000 a pop will do that. I'm sure there are many other places that need fundamental resources in the UK and everywhere else. A whole lot of refugees in the world. I think it'd be awfully cool if Scorsese or somebody else just did that. Said, yeah, so we raised $600 million from the studio to make this film, and we shot it for $150,000, and the rest of it all went to good works. Congratulations, we have solved world hunger.
That would be a fantastic thing, but at least I have stepped into the world of film financing enough to know that you would absolutely never get the money.
But there are examples where that's been done, where they've gone into indigenous parts of the world and built infrastructure for the local communities while they've been filming.
Yeah.
Like even rainwater tanks to get fresh water, and then gone, here you go. This is now yours.
I know. I just say that that's not the case, but that's literally our pitch for half of the things that we're going to try and do, is to try and genuinely make the communities better. Not by just some token things, but by raising the skills and everyone trying to build an infrastructure so that when you leave, there is a legitimate infrastructure for them to be creative and continue the industry and make things.
Yeah, and that does seem to be exactly what you folks are doing here.
Yeah.
Right? It seems to me that you're focused very much on the personnel infrastructure, the skills in the community, the experiences in the community. But there's no reason that can't combine with the kind of things that you were just talking about, where, okay, gee, well, we're shooting here and we absolutely need to build a prop that it just so happens is the perfect design spec for what this community needs to have when we leave. Mm-hmm. Right? There's no reason you couldn't do both. This lovely office space that we're in now, for example.
Yeah.
There's a whole lot of empty office space around the city of Aberdeen. It would be lovely if some of it was being converted into sound stages.
Yeah.
Or workshops.
Or workshops.
There is. Well, the company that hosts this space, Outer Spaces, that's one of their goals, is taking empty office spaces, and then they're a charity, and then having artists come in and use the space until the company that owns the premise has tenants.
Wouldn't it be cool if it was longer term than that?
It would be fantastic if it was longer term, because that's one of the problems. Is we have 7 days notice at any point. Anybody?
Oh, really?
Yeah. If anybody comes in and says they're paying for this office, we have 7 days.
Wow.
And that can be any time.
The city of Toronto had a really great alternative film scene in the 60s and 70s. It got better and better in the 70s. Old friends of mine won, I think it was the Palme d'Or at Cannes for a film they made in and around Toronto. And this became a major filmmaking mecca because people started saying, you know, these abandoned warehouses near the old shipyard, really only used by the police to beat up people they pick up every now and then. This could be a filmmaking area.
Yeah.
Right. And so it became one. Right. That could happen here.
It could. That's part of our plans, is to try and make that happen. The problem is, even we're focusing on the skills because, one, if you don't have a filmmaking community and skilled people, it doesn't work.
Right.
2, even if you get a building, it doesn't work unless there's projects and money.
Right. No, skills first.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Skills and experience first.
Yeah, and we need to attract projects and money. We've got a bunch of projects down the line that we're developing, and we're very excited by and positive by, and we think they're going to be great. But we have to raise the funds to be able to shoot them. Right. And that's going to be a case. Is basically our strategy of getting there is we have to prove to people that there is a strong community and there is talent. So that's why we're making these shorts, is to prove, look at all these people, look at this great project that we're putting out here. So now just let us keep growing, go along the path. Right. Give us some money, we'll give you a return, and then you will actually develop an industry here. So it's a case of trying to think about how it can actually happen. It's very easy to get caught up in wishful thinking, but it's hard to keep it grounded in what an actual strategy is going to be together. It's something I've been thinking about with the video game industry as well, trying to develop a video game industry here. Lots of people will talk about it, but no one has actual strategies or roadmaps on how to get there.
Aren't Universal Studios developing something in Scotland now, though? I had a rumour they'd bought some land.
There could be. Most of it's always Central Belt. Down south, there's been a few studios pop up down there. Yeah. So it's hard for us to try and make a case that, no, just come a little bit further. And the only way we can do that is by offering something. So yes, if we have really competitively priced space, if we have an infrastructure of talented people, then we become more attractive. But until we have that, it just costs them money to shoot up here, because if there's no infrastructure of people who can do the work here, they have to fly people up, they have to put them up, and then it just becomes more expensive. So that's why we have to try and build an infrastructure of talented people here that they can actually use. Yeah,
100%.
So it becomes competitive.
Yeah, and at the same time, the way you're doing it, you're building the potential for not just the people, but the businesses they might start on their own.
Exactly. Yeah.
And, it used to be when I think I could be getting this completely backwards, but I think it used to be that when they started shooting films in Toronto, they still had to ship the film to LA or thereabouts to be developed. And, how much money are you saving if you're doing daily shipments back and forth by carrier to get your dailies? Anyhow, so you need to build both. You need to have that, and then also so that the personnel with the experience and the skills, you need to have the supporting infrastructure in other ways, the ancillary businesses. Right? You're not going to run a film set if there's no one to cater it.
Yeah.
Right?
That's the easy part. There's plenty of catering companies here.
Lots of catering companies, vastly fewer companies that can do professional set building and knocking down, right?
Yeah, and that's one of the arguments that we've been saying, is that there are a lot of very talented people here in different industries that it really wouldn't be much of a thing for a good engineer to switch from engineering oil and gas products to engineering fun rigs and things like that, or just general rigging and prop set design. So that's one of the cases we're making.
See, the thing that I was thinking, that when we're speaking about getting scared of, about the horror movies, and then the first thing that popped in my mind is the movie It, and how they remade it and use a lot more digital effects and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's
and
always going.
The original. Well, obviously the original was one of my favorite, and why I'm actually scared of clowns as well, because I've watched it at a really, really young age, and then I've watched the remade version of it. Fair enough, it's cool and that, but it's not.
It's not as scary.
It doesn't get me scared.
Because it's not real.
Mm.
And it's the old style of shooting, isn't it?
Yeah.
And Tim, you can't compete with Tim Curry being a scary clown. He was terrifying.
Although the actor in the newer one, he was pretty good.
Is it Bill Skarsgård?
I believe so.
Yeah, he was great.
It's different, great in different ways.
Yeah. But very, very, the whole look was very, very different to the original, wasn't it? And it's a shame that they didn't sort of pay more homage to Tim Curry's version with the new version, but I think they just made it too different. Yeah,
that's always, I wonder if you're ever tasked to do a remake. Like, I always wonder if I was given a franchise that I love and I had to redo it, how much would I try to make it like the original, and how much would I try to do my own spin on it. I guess that's what people are saying about Alien Romulus is, I've not seen it yet, but I hear yes, there's a love letter to all of the old school practical effects, but some of the story kind of got lost in the weeds, and I don't know if that's the case. I've not seen it.
Well, going back to Transformers again, all of the Michael Bay Transformers films, they changed a lot. Like, they changed Megatron's entire look. They changed Optimus Prime to be able to have his faceplate open up so you could see his mouth. But then if you look at Bumblebee and how they shot the first 2 minutes of Bumblebee, like an old school Transformers cartoon, and it's visually stunning. If you haven't seen it,
no,
those first 2 minutes are stunning, and it's like, why could they not have done them like that? You know, Megatron looks like he should do.
Yeah.
All the others, just the way they shot it, even though it was all CGI, it's just shot in such a way that it looks more cartoon-like, and it's brilliant.
That's funny. So another recent example would be the character of Wolverine in the new Deadpool and Wolverine film. Deadpool literally makes the joke before you see Wolverine in his yellow costume. It's like, oh, it's taken you over 20 years to see this. For 20 years, they had made Wolverine films without ever putting him in a yellow jumpsuit. You know, the first one, they even joke about it. Cyclops looks back. Wolverine's like in his standard 2000s leather jumpsuit that's black. And they're like, he's like, you guys go out in these? He's like, what would you prefer, yellow spandex? Yeah. And it's like, the fans would, actually.
Yes, as a matter of fact.
Yeah, and I think they did that very well in the most recent Deadpool and Wolverine film.
Well, especially when he puts the hood up.
Yeah, they go.
The cheers that people had in the cinema.
And that's another thing. Oh, so there's I guess it's just waves of what people think they should be doing, and in some films, there's this need to try and make things look too realistic or plausible or realistic. So you'll have someone wearing a costume and they have to make it grimy and like it's existed in this world and it's all dirty and everything. And that was one of the things I actually stayed away from in my film Children of Kronos, which was I wanted it to feel like Kurosawa, or no, not Kurosawa, Ghibli, specifically Ghibli with this character. So she had a bright pink scarf, and I was saying the whole time, no, don't dirty it up. I want it to be bright pink because I want it to feel like a cartoon. So don't add any texture to it. Just keep it as flat and pink as possible, because on the screen it will look more cartoony like that. And they did that with Deadpool and Wolverine. There's like they had much less texture on things, so that when those costumes are on screen, that is yellow, that is red, as it would be in a cartoon. Yeah, it's a balance of what are you aiming for? Are you going for stylized? Do you want it to feel real and gritty?
Yeah, it's an interesting thing. To tie that together with something else that you were saying a moment ago about the expectations. It's what the audience wanted for a long time, and they never got it. Now they did. You don't want to give too much fan service to the audience. You don't want to do whatever every fanboy argues about online.
Yeah.
Or fangirl, but especially avoid what the fanboys say. Stupid boys. But what they want and what they think they want might be different things.
Yeah, for sure.
And definitely seeing Wolverine pop the claws in the yellow and blue suit is something that got a great fan reaction when I saw the film as well, and including from deep within the cold confines of my own old heart. That just felt wonderful to see that. It also felt wonderful when he was skipping through the multiverse, spoilers for a film lots of people have seen, and encountering many different versions of Wolverine.
Henry Cavill.
Yes.
Right.
Like Cavalrine. But I really liked when he showed up and said, "Oh, John Byrne era brown suit. Hey, didn't you fight the Hulk?"
Yeah.
Right, like that was just lovely. The callback to one of my favorite comic book writers and artists who hasn't been in a good relationship with Marvel for a long time, who really helped define Wolverine when he was co-writing and drawing the X-Men comics. To call back to that era. That's not the costume he wore when he fought the Hulk. He wore the yellow and blue one when he fought the Hulk. But it was a chance to call out John Byrne. It was a chance to talk about it that way. It was just, they took full advantage of that. Then they did the short Wolverine.
Yeah.
Right, because in the comics he's 5 feet tall, right? 5'2". And they did him as child size and child proportioned, which made it hilarious. to see him that small, made it a joke that he could be that small, and then treated him as the meanest badass version of Wolverine, right? Playing with the expectations, playing with the wants, playing with the desires, giving us visually things we have only dreamed would someday happen with a major film budget.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I love about Deadpool, though, is because Ryan Reynolds breaks the barrier with the audience multiple times.
Yeah.
And it adds that sense of comedy that we all want in a Deadpool film.
Yeah, you see him talking about it before they made it. I think it was an interview while they were doing the Wolverine Origins or whatever, the one where he first appeared.
With a mouth. And
you see Ryan Reynolds there just saying it would be my dream to make a proper Deadpool film where he's breaking the fourth wall, knows he's in a film, knows he's a comic book character.
So when he goes back in time and then shoots himself in the head. Yeah. And I also love that Ryan Reynolds gave Channing Tatum the opportunity to play Gambit because he wanted to play that role for so long.
Did you hear about the post-credit scene that was not included in the final release?
No.
So, you know how major spoilers for the film. If you haven't seen Deadpool and Wolverine, stop listening now, I guess, or accept that you've got lots of spoilers. You've probably heard this elsewhere. So when Cassandra Nova comes to Deadpool's Earth to kill everybody at the end of the film, can't believe I'm saying this out loud, but yeah, spoiler. When she shows up, when the big bad shows up to kill everybody, there's that portal that she's created using, I guess, the
sling ring.
The sling ring that she's stolen from Ned in some alternate universe. There's a post-credit scene where Gambit is walking amongst all of the other dead characters. And he looks up and he sees the portal. And he turns towards the camera and the camera drops down and you see the sling ring circle on the irises of both of his eyes. So his eyes look like they do in the cartoon and in the comics.
Oh, that's cool.
And you just know, he's going to come through that portal. He's going to be in another world.
They talked about that a lot, actually. Why they didn't give him the eyes like the comic until he activates the cards. But there was a reason behind it. I can't remember what the reason was, but
I don't know. But it was just a lovely post-credit scene. And I'd like to think that they're going to do a Gambit movie now.
I hope so.
Yeah. His Cajun accent, I think, is hilarious. But I'd pay money to see him in that role.
I'm done with comic book movies for a while. There's my interjection.
So do you not have an opinion on Robert Downey Jr. playing Doctor Doom then?
I couldn't care less. I'm done. I tapped out. Like I say, I tapped out a while ago. After Avengers Endgame, there was maybe a couple that I was semi-interested in. I was like, that's fine. But there's nothing new anymore.
I agree with you. I think they went on too much with Avengers. They didn't grow the group like they should have done. They kept it quite the same across all of the movies. But, I still love Guardians of the Galaxy.
Yeah.
If they come out with another Guardians of the Galaxy, I'll happily watch it. If they come out with another Deadpool, I'll happily watch it. But like you, I wouldn't go out of my way to go through and watch a new Avengers film at the cinema. I'd probably just wait for it to come out. And
see, for me, it entirely depends on who's making the film. Not the studio, because the studio makes very wide range of quality of films in terms of writing and production, in terms of casting and performance.
Yeah.
But if the Russo brothers are making another Avengers film, I really liked what they did. I don't recall who it was who directed the first Avenger film.
It was with Joss.
No, that was the first Avengers movie.
Oh, sorry.
I mean the first Captain America one. Captain America First Avenger. And I should remember his name, but I'm not recalling it right now. If he made another Captain America film, I'd love to see that, because I really liked what he did with the first one. I disagreed with half of his creative choices, or the studio's creative choices, but they made an entertaining film that took the character somewhere I wasn't expecting. So yeah, if the Russo brothers do the next two Avengers movies, I'll see them.
Or like if Jon Favreau directs a Star Wars film, we'll all watch it, because The Mandalorian is a work of art.
100%. I haven't enjoyed anything Star Wars that much in a long time.
No.
And I liked the Solo movie. And
yeah, I did as well.
There have been a few Star Wars projects I've really quite liked since the original 3 films, which, changed my childhood and everyone else's.
Yeah. I almost liked the Solo movie. What I didn't like about it was that they felt the need to explain every single specific thing that Han Solo ever says or does.
100%. And I'm sure that wasn't Ron Howard. I'm sure that was the studio.
Yeah, probably.
If they could just wind back a little bit, pull on the reins just a little bit for that kind of nonsense, I think that would have been a great film. I thought the casting was fantastic. Mm-hmm. He didn't have to meet Chewbacca. He didn't have to end up with the Millennium Falcon. We didn't have to see Lando Calrissian, as great as the performance of Lando Calrissian was, thanks to Childish Gambino.
Donald Glover.
Sorry, called him by the wrong name.
Yeah.
I liked Rogue One as well. Rogue One,
I really like Rogue One.
Great film.
Yeah.
Some people hate it, but I love it.
Yeah, in fact, that was one of the rare times when Darth Vader has been used in a modern Star Wars film, and I thought that was really well done.
Speaking of silhouettes, to be able to see things, in that last scene where you see Darth Vader, they've got fancy new lightsabers that actually light up. But the problem was every time you light it up in a dark room, all you see is the lightsaber. You don't see anything else. So yes, to get a silhouette, you have to light up things behind people. So they made the light up behind. So not how reality works, but how you expect reality to work.
Exactly. And that's what matters, right, with a film. It's like telling a story. If you want to bore everyone with your stories, tell it as a linear experience, right? The minute you start playing with the experience, you can make a story entertaining. Even the most dull and even the story I'm telling right now could be entertaining in the hands of a good storyteller, right? But not by recreating reality. What's that? Who was the first? Don Graham, I think, right? The first teacher of animation hired by Disney when they were first going to start mass producing cartoons. He was an instructor at an art college, and he came up with the flour sack test and some other stuff like that. And one of the famous quotes from his teaching is, animation is a caricature not just of form, but of movement. Right, and I think that's what film is. Film is a caricature of visual storytelling.
Yeah.
It has to be a caricature, because if you just show exactly what people see all the time, we see a lot.
But have you ever seen the documentary with Walt Disney going into detail about the multi-layer camera they developed?
Yeah.
When they wanted to keep certain perspectives the same for like the moon in the background, but they were struggling with early animation to actually get it because it was all flat plated.
Yeah.
And then coming up with the multi-layer camera where they could zoom in on the different plates was just phenomenal.
Yeah. So if you've never seen this before, this is a big, massive device, about the size of this table, but high as well, I think, where they'd have different layers of glass that they could paint: foreground, midground, midground 2, midground 3, background. Paint those different layers in and wind little spinny wheels. Spinny wheels, you see how good of an engineer I am. So that the plates can move in
relative to each other.
So you get a parallax effect. And Snow White had it.
Yeah, Snow White had it for the forest
Snow White
scenes.
is the first one.
The first one, the first feature.
And it's also the first movie that's considered 2.5 animation.
Yeah.
Because of that machine.
Yeah. The idea of the technology came from a guy from Montreal whose name was Barré, and he's the guy who invented the pegboard, which is supposed to be called the peg barré. That pegboard was the thing that allowed animators to hold their paper in exactly the same position as they drew the next picture. And the idea was that you could peg some pages for each character and some pages for background, and then getting that parallax effect of having them move at different speeds. The relative speed at which the background changes shows you how far away things are or how close they are. Barré is the guy who made up the original version of the machine that became that. And what's his name? Little Nemo in Slumberland and Gertie the Dinosaur. This is horrible. One of the great newspaper cartoonists of all time, and maybe the best hand-drawn animator in the era before Disney became famous the second time. Not his Oswald the Lucky Rabbit, and not his Alice in Wonderland stories. right? But I guess it was around the time of the Alice in Wonderland stories, this guy, whose name, Little Nemo in Slumberland, if you could look that up. It's terrible that I can't think of his name. But great.
Jackie doesn't have her look-up computer.
Sorry, Jackie.
It's only the recording computer.
For no good reason at all. Sorry about that. And I should recall his name. But he was the first person who did multi-layered animation on hand-drawn paper. So if you look at his cartoon of Gertie the dinosaur, he is live on stage in front of an audience doing what's essentially supposed to be a chalk talk. And he's showing drawings of
Winsor McKay.
Windsor McKay, thank you. And so he's doing drawings of a dinosaur in a prehistoric swamp. And then the dinosaur looks up and looks out at the audience and looks down at him and eats from his hand. So he can throw it a watermelon or something, and it catches the watermelon. So this was, I would say, the beginning of 1.5 or 2.5D.
That's great. Do you think you just said a dinosaur in that interaction, and now it reminded me of Jurassic Park at the start with John Hammond. Do you think that was purposeful? Or?
Absolutely, 100%.
Yeah. Oh, with Mr. DNA.
Mr. DNA, yeah.
Yeah. A lot of what they did in the first Jurassic Park movie was tribute to Windsor McKay. Some of it to other people, but a lot of it was Windsor McKay. One of my favorite scenes from that first movie is the one they're galumphing right towards us.
Oh, yeah.
Right. You get all of those two-legged dinosaurs running.
Gallimimus.
Yes, and one of them trips over the tree.
Yeah.
Do you know the story of that?
I've heard it once, but you remind me.
So they got the animators. They took the animators off to Africa and let them see wild animals running around in that. Then they had them in the back lot with their arms strapped close to their chests, running around as though they were dinosaurs. And they had them jumping over hurdles, and one of them tripped and fell down while all the others were running. And so they liked the look so much they put it in the film.
They did that with The Hobbit as well. You know, the original cartoon story of The Hobbit.
Oh,
the actor playing Aragorn tripped when they were doing the capture, and then they kept it. He tripped over the sword or something, didn't he? And then they kept it in because it just added a little bit of realism to it.
Yeah, that was Ralph Bakshi's cartoon, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so well done.
Yeah, drawn over, the rotoscoped.
Yeah,
that was
there's a
right.
great scene in an interview with him from decades ago where he was trying to explain to the Italian crew on set that, they're wearing medieval costumes, but it's okay that a jet is flying overhead, and it's okay that you can see the telephone wires because it's going to be rotoscoped. And he couldn't get them to understand. They kept calling cut and wanting to wait while other stuff was happening. And finally he said, Fellini. And they, okay, Fellini, okay.
You'll have to enlighten me.
Fellini was a semi-surrealist filmmaker. The most famous filmmaker.
Gotcha.
Federico Fellini. So it's just like, this is just abstract.
Yeah.
It's art above our heads. And then all the crew went, Fellini, okay. Yes, you can have medieval people with telephone wires in the back.
That reminded me of another... I just keep interjecting of why Jurassic Park is great. One of the others of the team, the ILM CG team, I should really remember names, but it's been this long since I've talked about it properly. They basically, so in VFX, when this is a mistake I made with my film. It's a lot easier if you don't move the camera. It's really easy. You just layer things over the top of each other and then you're good. When the camera moves, you've got to do a whole process called match moving, which can be difficult, especially depending on what era you're doing this. There are a lot of tools now that make it a lot easier. But in Jurassic Park, they initially suggested that. It's like any CG scenes, keep the camera fixed. And Spielberg was immediately like, no. If you're telling me I can't move the camera, you can forget it. We're not doing CG. So that was when they basically had to come up with the technology for match moving. They had to there and then come up with all the trigonometry required to translate the camera's position in space so that you could get all the CG elements to match up. And that scene specifically with the Gallimimus running along, you can see the little golf balls they get, tennis balls, they pop on the ground at different points so you know where and when they are.
But do you feel also like if you look at the original Jurassic Park film versus Jurassic World, the original Jurassic Park film, the sets were so huge that I don't know what it is about the new films, but especially when they've got, like, spoiler alert, but the pterodactyls attacking all the people in the village, it just all looked fake to me. Whereas the scene with the Tyrannosaur and, Dr. Grant holding the flare, it just felt so real, but it's because that set was so vast that they were actually shooting something that wasn't all blue screened or green screened. And
I have a few theories. One, okay, this will be my explanation. One, there's just storytelling. The pacing up to that moment
100%
is some of the best editing you'll ever see in a film. The T-Rex just doesn't appear. There is about 4 minutes of suspense until it appears, and it's building up and building up and building up. The other thing that completely draws you into that scene is the rain.
Yeah.
And it's not just it's raining, it's you hear and feel the rain on those cars. You feel like you're in those cars because you can feel the rain above you and dripping down on the sides.
And if I can add to that, if you don't mind, we've all been there. We've all been in a car in a rain, and we automatically have a visceral reaction to the idea that I don't want to get out of the car. I really don't want to. Please, nobody get out of the car. And that just helps set that tone. You combine that with, like you were saying, that shaking of the water.
Yep.
Well, I think that effect was actually accidental. They discovered the thing with the water. It was completely accidental them discovering that. But what a pivotal
it wasn't
in that film.
It wasn't accidental. No, they were trying to get it to work for ages, and it just wouldn't look right until they figured out if you put a guitar underneath and pluck a string, it did it perfectly.
That's what it was, right?
Yeah.
Okay, by getting a uniform.
But they were trying to bang it for ages and just would be weird. Everything else would shake. Yeah. But if you just plucked the guitar string underneath, it just vibrated it right.
That suspense with that glass of water. It's like,
yeah. So that was a trope for ages. Just I remember being a kid, we would like bang a table and be like, "Oh, T-Rex is coming."
You and me and everybody else did that for years. Yeah. The Simpsons. Yeah. How many times did they use that trembling of the glass of water?
Well, and adverts were using it for ages as well, weren't they?
Yeah, and rightly so. It got immediately into the collective unconscious as this is how you know danger is coming. It was exactly like the theme music to Jaws.
Yeah.
Right, half an hour after the film is released, everybody knows it.
And then as a kid, whenever you're in the sea, that song is playing in your
head.
And
other films stole it. If I'm remembering correctly, I'm pretty sure maybe it's Independence Day. Before the ships are coming over, you see things shaking and people looking at the things shaking to, seeing the not direct threat, but what the threat is affecting.
Yeah, the pending threat.
Mm-hmm.
I think you're right with the storytelling element and the build-up of suspense, which you don't really have much of anymore.
So that's part of it. So it's if you're making a moment, it has to be a moment, and you got to have quiet before the loud. And narratively, it has that whole layer, but it also has it in sound design as well.
Yeah.
Because if you look at the levels of that scene, it's just little bits here and there, little bits here and there, boom, like goat's leg on the roof. Like there's these moments like something won't feel loud unless you have a lot of quiet before it. But it's not.
Same with Jurassic Park 3, didn't they? With the pterodactyl enclosure, where they're walking through that and it's just fog, and then they suddenly feel something land on it. And
it's closer. But yeah, that's it. It's pacing. I think a lot of new films, they just try to be a thrill ride too much. Where
I think that's a very good point, because they are often designed as thrill rides.
Yeah.
Right. Not just a film that's like a thrill ride, but Disney is going to make a thrill ride of this. That's why they put the scene in the movie. That's why they spent the money on developing it, so that people will pay to go on the thrill ride.
Yeah.
As opposed to just a bit of good storytelling. We can call it back to that scene from the first Alien film that you guys were talking about earlier. He survived. It was scary. There was a facehugger. Nobody knew what he meant. Nobody knew what was going on, but it fell off. He's okay.
Yeah.
And we can all have dinner.
Yeah.
And we can laugh at the table, and they've set the tone. We know this scene. We've all been in this scene in 100 movies. We know holy fuck, we did not expect that. Right? All of a sudden he's contorting and it's horrible and it's terrible. And then, like you were saying, practical effect, the other cast members suddenly have crap all over their faces.
Yeah.
right? And absolute abject horror. They built that moment. They built that moment so carefully with a level of emotion similar to the level of sound that you were talking about.
And it's a pretty simple, easy theory. It's so easy to get caught up and forget the basics, but it's essentially, if something's not landing, you haven't earned it enough, is what we say, which is show it to other people. If they're just feeling a bit about something, you got to earn it more. So then, yes, you have to spend more time with suspense build up, or you got to plant little seeds about what's going to happen beforehand, so that people in the audience who are a bit more switched on and engaged feel a bit of joy, like, oh, it all makes sense now. So yeah, you've got to earn those moments, and you can't just start with them. There's so many films now that just start with an action piece.
This was one of my. Sorry.
Oh no, I was just going to say, there's so many films that start with an action piece, and I'm just like, I don't care. I don't know who these people are. I'm not invested. Okay, it's flashy and cool. You feel like you have to thrill me and introduce me to your world, but I don't care about anything happening here.
Yeah, I think a big reason for that is the way films are marketed. Right, films are almost always now targeted at a young audience. Research in Hollywood a couple of decades ago showed that 15-year-olds really want to know how things turn out before they see them, so that they can feel that they're in the know. So you have to do advertising that shows how every important scene turns out. That becomes the advertising standard. They make sure that footage is given to the totally independent team that makes the trailers for the film and the advertisements for the film. And all of a sudden, every film is a series of exciting moments with easily recognizable resolutions, so that you can cut these resolution moments together.
Yeah,
it's marketed for people who don't understand that there should be a story leading up to these things, and that there would be greater impact.
The other issue you've got is that a lot of films nowadays are telling the same story. So Star Wars, we all know that universe already. Alien, we know that universe already. Jurassic Park, we know that. There's a lack of original new stories. And I think that's a big issue as well, is because you go into the cinema now and you watch Alien Romulus, but you know what's going to happen. You know that the facehuggers are going to escape, and they're going to impregnate the people with the chest bursters, and then they're going to turn into a xenomorph. But there is a complete lack of original storytelling now. It's
I think it was Tarantino was saying something vaguely along the lines of that Hollywood goes through cycles like this, where established IP is always safe, so it's where all the money goes, until it doesn't work anymore. So Marvel, it's stopping working. Star Wars, it stops working. People just get franchise fatigue and don't want to see another Planet of the Apes films. Sometimes they take the wrong lesson from it and try and reboot the franchise again. But the correct lesson is give new filmmakers with new worlds and stories the opportunity. That's the correct thing to do in these cycles. And you see it certain waves. So like the late 90s, early 2000s, there was a wave of it where you have The Matrix come along. You have like all these different franchises just pop up and appear. And it feels like, yes, we're not getting that as much right now.
Yeah.
I was about to say there's almost some, and every time I was about to try and think of one, no, it's literally a product or an established character that they're just trying to bring into, like, there was Pixels, there's Barbie. Barbie was interesting and good, but it's not a new original concept.
Well, Prometheus and Alien Covenant were both supposed to be original films in the same universe, but completely different. So it was set in the Alien universe, but it wasn't supposed to be a story about the aliens, and the engineers just so happened to look like the original dead character they find in the first film.
Yeah, the space jockey.
Yeah, but they weren't supposed to be the same story, which is why the creature comes out the back instead of the chest and so on. But everybody gave them hate because they were like, "Oh, this is nothing like Alien." But Ridley always says it was never intended to be Alien. It was supposed to be a completely different story.
And that comes down to the marketing again.
Yeah,
right? That should have been the clear message before anyone saw the film. They should have understood that.
Yeah.
If you want it to work. One of the reasons I love the fact that John Byrne was called out by name. A lot of great writers and artists have touched Wolverine in the past and have done some beautiful work with the character. John Byrne was someone who famously, at the height of his fame, was given a chance to reinvent most of the big American comic books. So when they decided to totally reboot Superman for the first time, he's the one who did the reboot. And he did a very successful reboot of the character. Changed a whole bunch of facets, took from all throughout the previous 70 years or 50 years of the character's existence, and created a really cool new mythos that could be Superman going forward from there.
Man of Steel.
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought that was incredible, that film.
Yeah. Oh, no, I mean the comic book series.
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
Some of that was based on, a lot of that came from other comics that were written and drawn a decade later.
Yeah.
But no, just the idea that Luthor, instead of being a mad scientist, would be a corporate billionaire. That comes from there, and a whole bunch of other stuff.
Yeah.
Rebooting Lois Lane as an intrepid reporter again, instead of just a gushing fangirl of incredible lack of vision. And a whole lot of other things. His mother and father lived to adulthood instead of dying when he was a kid. Anyway, lots and lots of stuff. He did the same thing with the Fantastic Four. He did the same thing with Wolverine. He took these characters and just added a depth. So when the task was just make the character exciting again, he did it by adding depth to them and not saying, hey, we'll make him 20 years old again and that'll be cool. Yeah. Right? Let's make a flashier suit and that'll be cool. Instead, so there's a lovely scene in one of the X-Men comics from the first or second year that Wolverine was in them, the new X-Men, where they've landed somewhere on Earth after being in space. And they don't know where they are. And then Wolverine says, we're in Japan. They're like, what? And he's picked up a newspaper and he's reading a Japanese newspaper. And no one in the world had any idea that Wolverine might have a history in Japan. And John Byrne, as the co-creator of these stories, just drew it without talking to the writer about how it would happen. Right? Chris Claremont was writing the scripts. They were co-plotting. According to Byrne, most of the plotting was by him, and Claremont would write the scripts afterwards, but Claremont disagreed with that. Anyway, it just added this fantastic depth that 30, 40 years of other writers have built on since then, with like in the X-Men movie where he goes to Japan, and now we have an explanation for why he was in Japan and what was going on there. Very different from the one Byrne intended. Yeah. But still built on that idea. Anyway, I think that's part of it. If you are going to keep an IP going, because your corporate overlords refuse to let the IP die, whether it's Superman or Wolverine or Mickey Mouse, right? Do something to it that makes it richer. Yeah. Not just more visually exciting for what this generation thinks is visually exciting. Add some dimensions to it.
That's one of the fun dimensions that they've been playing around with Deadpool, where he 100% wants to die all the time, and he hates it that he can't. To the point where he figures out in one short comic book series that all he needs to do is kill his fans, because the only reason he exists is his fans won't let him die. So while you're reading this one, you see him like walking into a house. He's like slowly figuring out, like, I can never die. What can I do? Blah, blah, blah. And you see him breaking into a house. And then the last pane is just someone reading that comic part in the gun behind his head.
Nice. nice.
Yeah.
Not that I'm advocating that anyone should go out and murder Deadpool fans. That is not a good idea.
But that's ultimately it. Is the only way things can die like that is if people stop caring and making a fuss and paying to go see it. Yeah. That's the other part. That's the easiest way to make a comic book hero die is don't go and watch their films or don't buy their comic books. Yeah. That's the only way. I guess there are original films still coming, because when we were talking about that, I was like, what's the most original film I saw recently that I really enjoyed? And Everything Everywhere All at Once was one that popped out to me. What
a great film.
And it's its own IP and it's its own thing, but it's a commentary on films as much as it is a great film. Did you see it?
I haven't seen it. No.
Oh, please go see it.
Fantastic. Please. A lot of fun, practical things in there too. Their whole special effects team was 5 guys, and they were using After Effects and other things. Like it was literally a team of 5. So you see, there's like a really cool effect where she's like bouncing around universes and she kind of bursts back. And the way they did it was so simple, and it looks more convincing than half of the crazy stuff you'll see in, let's say, a comic book hero film. Because in the comic book hero films, they have all the tools. So the standard pipeline is boot up Houdini, get Houdini's a VFX software that's very complicated, can do a lot of simulations and particles and all sorts of other things. But they'll do an R&D thing. Well, they'll make these scripts, and well, not scripts, I forget what they're called in Houdini, but you can make these custom things that will work. And they've got this whole pipeline of where they're going to make these effects and blah, 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 and do all this. So that, okay, what's standard process? Get them in the green room, get the lighting, do all this, record that, bring it in, put it through all the post pipeline. And you would have some sort of weird effect with lots of particles and interesting energy, whatever. But it kind of just feels flat and interesting. Whereas in Everything Everywhere Wallace, how did they tackle that? The director, I think it was literally one of the directors, figured out with their camera that they could do a low exposure video. So you could expose it for a second. I don't know, say 2 seconds is one exposure. And he just walked around the city with this recording. So we'd take these low exposure shots and he just kept walking. So they've got this video plate where there's this kind of long motion blur of going through space, and it looks really cool. And then, okay, how do we composite that onto the actress? I forget her name. They got a big TV and 2 other big TVs next to her, because TVs emit light, and especially big new ones, and they just shot it real. So they put the video behind her and made her go like this. And it looks so convincing. It's because they also got the TVs at the side as well. So it's like a very cheap volume. So it was like a cheap volume. Volumes are these big new crazy ones that Disney have with the domes that project all the lights. You can do it if you just get TVs at the side as well. And it works. But they had so much, like I was watching a couple of videos of them doing other effects, and it's just that problem solving, as you were saying earlier. Just sometimes when you have a very expensive, smart, useful tool, you think you have to go to that very expensive, smart, useful tool, when sometimes a hammer would have done it. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Maslow.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Can you recall the name of the directors?
There's something brothers.
I think it's just a man's name, but it's and then a man's name with an S at the end. It's like
Daniel Brothers.
The Daniels?
I think it's Daniels, yeah.
Yeah,
or
the Daniels.
Check that.
Anybody who's listening to this, please, I won't describe it at all, but go find the music video they made before they made that film. I think they only made one, and if you enjoyed that film, you will enjoy that music video. If you are under legal age, do not do that or listen to this podcast.
I have to look that one up. I've not seen it. But yeah, that's bringing. It comes back to, why are you making a film in the first place as well? If you're just, and I guess a lot of people are in this industry where it is their job. Then you have people like me who have another job, but still do all this for the love of it. And even though, I'd be doing it either way.
For now.
Yeah.
You'll get to a point where you'll do it full time.
Yeah. We'll get there. Okay. Let's end on one story, because you've got about 20 minutes or so.
Yeah.
Will, talk to us how you got into this in the first place.
So, where do I start?
Yeah.
Anywhere you want.
So I've always loved film. Growing up, Gremlins used to terrify me, but I loved it. And films like The Dark Crystal, Labyrinth, and so on, the magic behind creating these worlds always fascinated me. But being quite technologically minded, I ended up going into IT full-time as an IT consultant. And I just got to a point where I didn't feel like I was making much of a difference working in IT, because you never got to see the end product, because I was working for big insurance companies and big companies where you'd be building a solution for them, but it would be for their behind-the-scenes team to work facilitating customers and stuff like that. So I never really felt like I was contributing much in that sense. So always having a love of Halloween as well, I kind of started up the shop because I used to buy prosthetics, but you couldn't really sell them you couldn't find them anywhere, sorry. So that's how it kind of started. But then through a very fortunate series of events, I ended up going to New Zealand in 2020 for a holiday to visit my uncle, and I got stuck due to COVID, because I think a week after I got there, COVID shut the world down. New Zealand shut the borders. You couldn't leave. You couldn't come in. Couldn't go out. And after about a year of being there, I managed to get a job at Weta Workshop working on the Rings of Power. For me, it was an absolute dream. You know, walking into that space where so much storytelling has happened was a dream. You know, rows of weapons down the walls and the guns from District 9 and everything else. You know, so much magic happening there. And getting to work on a Lord of the Rings universe series, for me, was just, I felt like that was a dream come true. So after going to New Zealand, working on the first season and then coming back, that kind of cemented my decision to step away from IT in 2019 and do this full time. It was like, this is what I want to do. I want to bring, you know, I want to make magic, and I want to watch people's reactions seeing the work that I do, and not just from a disgust of working on a horror film, but just the magic of creating creatures and creating these worlds that people fall in love with, for me, was everything. And it still happens now. You know, I still watch films like, or even series like the Dark Crystal series on Netflix. I loved it, absolutely loved it, and it's such a shame that they didn't do a second season. But I've watched that countless times, and I still will continue to watch it because I love the amount of work that some of my colleagues in the industry put into that, and the passion that they have for that universe just shows throughout the whole thing, in my opinion. So yeah, for me, it was all about making a difference, and I feel doing this really does make a difference.
Yeah, that's great. That's beautiful. That's, yeah. Purpose is always a big thing that helps drive people. And that makes a lot of sense, not seeing...
And I get to make really cool stuff.
Yeah, like that's a big part of it. If you put all this time and energy ever into something in your life, you want to be able to see.
Well, there's a really famous saying, if you do what you love, you never work a day in your life.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
I feel like that now, you know. I get to make lots of crazy things, and a lot of people don't think it is a proper job. But what do you define as a proper job? Do you define working behind a desk day in, day out, 7 days a week as a proper job? Just because there's a stable income there doesn't mean it's a proper job.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if you're doing something you love, I think that gives you purpose.
Yeah.
And I think that's what a lot of people lack in our world, is purpose.
100%.
And watching film gives a lot of people purpose because it helps bring out things in their imagination. So, you know, I feel like my purpose is to help people live the magic in the world and see the wonders of things, you know, like, for example, Avatar. Everybody came out of that theatre after watching Avatar looking at our planet and going, oh my God, what are we doing to the world? And that was what James Cameron intended with that film, was to say, look at the synergy that this species have with their planet and look at what we don't have with ours.
Yeah. That is the power of film. To take a simple concept like, hey, we've completely lost touch with this whole experience of nature and industrializing, and then hyper stylize that as much as you can. That's the power of tools and narrative.
Yeah.
Take a simple concept or feeling like that, and then hyper stimulus, make it over the top, beautiful, different planet. Yeah. And so you can really, really feel the obvious deep emotional connection behind it.
A caricature.
A caricature. That's the proper phrasing. Exactly. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. Unfortunately, I think it's unfortunate that I'm not working a proper office job, because I think if I was doing an office job with in IT, it would be much easier for me to jump. But the problem is I actually do enjoy teaching for all the same reasons that you tell me, which is I do have an output product because I take a bunch of people in at the start of my course who have no skills, and then at the end of them I help them make a project, and I see all their projects, I grade all their projects, and it's always producing something. Yeah. For that, it's not me producing it, but I've helped them make something. So I see the growth. That purpose is there, which is annoying because it drives me. It would drive me much more if I was just doing something else.
Well, I'm glad you're doing it, and I'm sure there's a lot of students who are glad too.
Yeah. All right. Okay. So, John, do you want to finish on anything else? Anything to add? Very good.
That's the only moment of silence I will ever give this podcast.
Yeah, so I think that's a good place to end on what is the magic. We say movie magic. What is that magic? And it's it's a simple act of creation, and being able to communicate thoughts, feelings, and stories in a hyper-stimulated, characterized way.
In order to inspire, right? Not just to do it. Not just to do it for the sake of doing it, not just because we can do it, but because it can have an impact on people and on the world they live in.
Yeah, and we've just solved the answer of all of the bad VFX and bad things we're talking about in film. That's probably half the problem is people making decisions that aren't at the heart of it. It's probably where things go wrong.
100%. 100%. Glad we solved that. Now everyone can get on and only make good stuff.
Yes. So
you're welcome, world.
Studio execs, if you were watching this podcast, take note. Do it for the love. Do it for the message. Don't do it for the profit.
Or do it for the profit based on the love and the message.
Yeah.
You can have all of them. Just don't make the profit the only motivator.
Yeah. All right. Thank you, everybody. If you've listened this far, as always, thank you very much for listening. We hope you enjoyed it, and we'll see you next time. Thanks, Will.
Thank you.
Thanks, Will. Thanks, Jamie.
Thanks, John. Thanks, Jackie.
Thanks, Jackie.
SocTalk is a production from the Robert Gordon University School of Computing.
Today's episode was brought to you by the letter pi and the number pi.